Many young wargamers cut their teeth on the classic game Axis and Allies. However, there's a new version out now, G.I. Joe Battle for the Arctic Circle. Let's take a look at this on Legendary Tactics.
I'm here with my buddy Gastel today. We're going to give you a really quick preview of the game. We'll cover everything. Is this game better than Axis and Allies? How does it compare if you know Axis and Allies? How does the game play? How does it stand up? Let's start with that first question. So if you know Axis and Allies, is this an easy game to learn? Is it familiar?
Well, what I found was we were struggling with some of the rules, but then we remembered it was Axis and Allies, and just following the rules of Axis and Allies that we knew, we realized that's exactly what this game is following.
Well, it's really funny because I'm normally not the rules teacher. Gastel does that. But for this game, I was teaching the rules and I had only half finished the rules when he got here. And so I started jumping ahead to some other elements. And while I was explaining sort of the powers of some of the units, he said, oh, and when we do the combat, remember, you'll roll your dice and you have to get this or less. He hadn't read the rules ever and he already knew the rules. So I think that's a positive. If you want to jump into combat quickly, you will understand this game fairly fast.
Absolutely. And now I will say I felt this game is maybe targeted at maybe a younger group, and the rule book was a little wordy, but with that said, an adult playing with their kids is going to be able to explain the rules to them, and kids are going to have an absolute blast with this game. It is completely within their ability to play.
It really is. So I was thinking about this as a game I would play with my kids. You get to build up your production. I think it's got a cleaner system of production in this. So instead of having paper money, which is admittedly a bit outdated, it's got production points that you earn through your bases, and through a strategic reserve is essentially leftover cash. If you don't spend this, then you get to use it in the next round. So
and the victory points as well.
The victory points will add to that as well. So I would agree with you in terms of the rules. There are a few elements of the rule book that were a little bit confusing. So like this, for instance, I wish they'd put an infantry unit there to show us that's an infantry unit that can't travel here and here. And you know, this I'm looking at going, well, why can't it travel from land to land? Oh, that's because it's down in this corner of the board and it's moving off the board. With it zoomed in, that's a little tricky to get. So there's a few elements like that. If you're learning from the book, it's going to feel a lot harder than it is to actually play the game. So when I sit down with my boys, I'm going to talk about the units in terms of I'm not going to be like, here's the rule for this, here's the rule for that. Instead, it'll be, okay, these guys have the guided missile system. What's it called in this game?
Fire-by-wire missiles?
Wire guided system or something like that. So I'm going to talk to them about what the special powers are of that because this unit has a targeting system, it gets to choose who it does the damage to. Now normally in Axis and Allies, the person doing the defending gets to choose, but in this case it reverses that. So and I think those special powers are what makes this game, sets it apart. You don't get that in Axis and Allies. Axis and Allies, everybody essentially gets the same.
Right. And one thing, well, unless you do your research, this doesn't have the ability to research.
That's true.
Upgrades. Yeah. But at the same time, it sort of already comes in. And it's that slimming down of the rules that really makes this a great game for families.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the board is compact enough that you can get around and you can have some fun and you can blow some stuff up, and it's not going to be too much of a challenge.
No, and I've also felt that there was good theme to this game. There's these units called W.O.L.F units, which are like the Cobra tanks. Well, my first question was, if you remember the cartoon, everything was an acronym, so what does W.O.L.F stand for? And
Winter Operational Light Fighting Vehicle.
Right, and that's cool. Like, that makes it feel like you're a G.I. Joe or a Cobra. And all of the units aren't just called a plane or a fighter. They're the Skystriker and the Rattler and the Snowcat, and the troopers are Arctic troopers or snow serpents. Like, it just drips with theme that children can dig their teeth into. Another thing I liked was they also have a reduced number of unit types.
Right.
So
this makes a huge difference.
In the classic Axis and Allies, there's 5 different naval units. In this, there's only 2. And what they've done is they basically combined battleship, destroyer, and troop carrier all into a single unit called a cruiser.
That's right, absolutely. Now, if you look at the components too, while we're discussing those, you'll probably feel, if you're an Axis and Allies fan, that this is squished down a little bit. I mean, it probably saves a little bit of material. It looks a little bit funny, and when it's damaged, you tip it on its side, and that can be a little bit of a challenge. We were just tipping it upside down.
Right.
And you'll also notice that the cruisers, when I first opened it, I thought, oh, isn't that a dainty battleship? And it's because it's meant to be a smaller ship. These are icebreakers too, and so the asymmetry of the game allows, you played as the Cobra and Destructo, was it?
Destro.
Destro, right. And so they're freezing up areas of the board, and I think that was a really neat addition to the game, that you can change the nature of, so for you actually circled around. I'll put a shot of that up on screen. You completely surrounded my base to lock down the only place I could produce ships. Really interesting strategy. And you were also using it strategically to block me, so I had to go around. And of course, I'm trying to chisel through and finish the game off before you can get the victory points you need.
Yes, however, I did find that the asymmetry of the production, I was constantly falling behind, and I needed to have a more decisive win at the beginning. Now, with that said, the dice were not with me for the whole game.
And if you know Axis and Allies, you know you can have the best force in the world, and you can go up against a little paltry unit of infantry, and they can just roll absolutely right, and all your bombers and fighters miss, and that can completely shift the tides of war. So if you're a person who doesn't like dice games, this might not be for you. I personally find that it was kind of fun, and every single chance we had to attack each other, we took it, because, you know, like I had 4 fighters against your entire infantry, and just for fun, it was like, well, let's just fight. Let's see what happens.
And it was a lot closer than we thought it was going to be.
It was very close.
Yeah.
And it almost becomes a war of attrition. I played the good faction, the Joe faction, and I had better income, but I also and was trying to bleed you dry, and you were just like locking your bases down and defending hard.
Which I think was sort of where we started to have that analogy with Russia versus Germany in the classic Axis and Allies. So it still had the feel of the classic Axis and Allies game.
That's right. Now, it's broken down into these factions here, and each faction has their own power. We found that in our particular game, it was a little bit more imbalanced. It was much harder for you to use the Cobra Commander, because they basically sacrifice, kamikaze style, one of their units for one of yours. If you don't have a lot of units to start with, it's hard to do that. Destro also, you never really used that.
No, I wasn't able to use it at all. The only reason was I had to defend. It's when the Joes are defending in great numbers. Destro is a strategist and can do a little bit better. Nice thematically, however, in practice, I never had enough units to go against a Joe faction with 6.
Right, and so maybe that requires that you actually build more infantry units, or maybe you let me accumulate somewhere so that you can launch that attack.
Right.
I use this every single turn, I think, where you can build units that are out in the field rather than just going to your base. So that was super helpful. And this one caught you a little off guard when suddenly the units are you're used to an Axis and Allies, they only move 1 space, and in this all the other units, infantry units only move 1 space, but Snowjob's troopers can actually go too, so you can surprise them with that sort of thing if they're not an experienced player. But that's great. And I think also we should mention component-wise, this is something that newer gamers, they might not have, like, I played original Axis and Allies, I loved it. It used the poker tokens, you know, and they're fairly cheap, in order to indicate 1 or 3 units, and then you stack and you create these units. I always prefer having the sculpts on the board, because it just feels like they're actually there as opposed to represented. But as an Axis and Allies player, I don't mind this, and I actually like it because it reminds me of the original.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about the sculpts, this is the Rattler, but there's a different sculpt for the
Skystriker.
Skystriker, and
yeah. So this looks like an F-14 Tomcat or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, classic, right?
Yes, that's right. And so if you're used to the traditional units in Axis and Allies, it feels nice to suddenly have this little guy. He's totally different looking, right? And same, like the units, I think the sculpts are quite nice.
Yeah. I mean, even the infantry were different, right? Like the
more modern.
These are snow serpents, and those are a different sculpt.
That's right.
For the Joes.
Yeah, minor differences, but it's kind of cool that they're slightly different. If you're looking for intricate detail, you won't get that here, but I think this is meant to be a budget game as well. It's meant to stay fairly cheap. These, for instance, are 1 mil, and to me that feels like these should be 2 mil, like more like Catan style, a little thicker. But on the converse, these actually feel much thicker than normally. I'm used to sort of the card weight material, more like this, but these are actually 1 mil, quite thick.
Right.
So,
and talking about components as well, the guide, the sort of the player reference guide, is excellent. While the rules were being explained, one of the reasons I was able to jump in on, this is how that worked because of Axis and Allies, is because it was quite clearly explained on here. So if you're trying to teach a young child, you have one of them, you can read through these, and you can probably avoid a lot of the wordiness that's in the manual.
That's right, yeah. Something else that was cool that we noticed partway through the game is that obviously this is the North Pole, which makes this Greenland.
Yeah.
This is Canada. We've got Russia and probably Scandinavia over here.
There's Norway and Finland, and yeah, it's cool.
So,
well, and then there's the Cobra base, the Cobra secret base. Like, it just, when we recognized that, I felt it elevated the game a little bit.
That's right, yeah. And so playing as an adult, one adult versus another. We played a 2-player game. How do you feel this game stands up in terms of weight, in terms of enjoyment? Where do you place it?
I think if it was us playing it regularly, I'd probably want something a little more complex. Mm-hmm. But if I was playing with an 8-year-old to maybe a 12 or 14-year-old, this is the game. And if
Perfect.
I was a kid and this game was presented to me, that box would be super worn out. I'd be taking it to my friend's house. I'd be playing it all the time. I'd be playing it against myself. This game would just get played to death.
Absolutely. So overall, I would agree with that sentiment. I think it's a fun game. I want to get this out again. I got a couple of friends I'd like to play this with, and I would definitely like to see this one hit the table again. Now, between this and Axis and Allies, we said at the start, which is the better game. So where do we land on that?
Well, at first, I was prepared to say Axis and Allies, but I don't know if you can actually compare the two. Axis and Allies and G.I. Joe Battle for the Arctic Circle are a different target market. They fit different niches.
Yeah, if you're looking more for history and you want spaces that are the shape of the country rather than hexagons, then that one feels like it's more grounded in the real world. And if you're trying more for like a simulation feel or trying to teach a little bit of history when you play it, that's kind of cool. Of course, it's very light on the theme that way, but this one I think is a little bit more imaginative. I think this one will hit the table a lot quicker. It's much faster to set up. There's 3 different scenarios in the booklet that you can play through. So if we're looking at which one is going to get played more, probably this one. But I'm a purist at heart, and ultimately I prefer Axis and Allies simply because I grew up, it was my first big box game, and there's the nostalgia associated with it that I wasn't a G.I. Joe guy, so the nostalgia isn't here for this one. But that being said, this is coming to the table next week with my kids.
Well, and that's one thing that I think is a negative to this. I think the G.I. Joe theme is too old. Right? And I think instead, if this was out in the late 80s, early 90s, this would have been my favorite game on the entire face of the planet.
Me too.
Thing.
Well, the asymmetry was something we weren't seeing too much of, but I mean, some Cosmic Encounter had some of that, but variable player powers and just the different types of units having different powers. And the ice coming, like there's a lot there, I think, for a medium weight war game.
Mm-hmm. I love the ice aspect of this. That was the one power that I had that I really felt I was able to control the makeup of the board.
Yes.
And that frustrated you in very pleasing ways for me.
That's right. Now, if you've played this game a lot, please let us know. Do you find there's an imbalance at all? We felt that I handily took care of them, but then again, that might be the result of some good die rolls early. I wiped out a lot of your units quickly, and it was hard for you to recover from that, so you were just holding back this tidal storm. But let us know in the comments if you have any experience with this game, if there is an imbalance that way. It's been play tested. I'm sure it's probably balanced. You probably just played really horribly.
Possibly, but I also thought, as I was packing the game up, I was thinking about the imbalance, and I was thinking that if I was the parent, I would take on the evil Cobra team, which I feel is slightly weaker, and let your kids play the good Joes, and you want the Joes to win, sort of, and that lets the child have a bit of an advantage. So I would have the more experienced player play the Cobras, but with that said, I might have been a little too aggressive off the start, and maybe if I had started a little defensively, I might have been able to turn into an offensive mode rather than start offensively.
For sure, yeah. We really had no idea what we were doing, so either way, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
It was good.
That's great. Well, make sure you get out there,
get gaming,
and be legendary.